Hey everyone, this is State Capitalism, Its Possibilities and Limitations by Friedrich Pollock. I'm getting this from the Essential Frankfurt School Reader. Um, there's a little introduction here, or an introductory paragraph. Yeah, okay. In this essay, first published in Studies in Philosophy and Social Sciences, Volume 9, in 1941, Pollock presents us with a carefully worked out economic model of, quote, state capitalism, end quote, as a post-capitalist social formation. The essay derives its crucial insight from several contexts: Pollock's own study of Soviet planning, Keynesian theory, and the debate about socialist planning in the 1930s, the claim of the end of the, quote, primacy of the economic, end quote, and the rejection of political economy as the main context of critical theory are Pollock's most dramatic conclusions. Nevertheless, the reader should notice that Pollock is not postulating a stable and impenetrable society in the manner of the later, quote, totalitarian thesis, end quote. Instead, Pollock searches, with some limited success, for the possibility of a political crisis theory. So that's a little introduction. And here we go. Nothing essentially new is intended in this article. Every thought formulated here has found that thought's expression elsewhere. Our aim is to bring widely scattered and often conflicting ideas into a somewhat consistent summary, which may form the starting point for a discussion of the workability of state capitalism. In regard to the method of this study, the following points ought to be emphasized. Whether such a thing as state capitalism exists or can exist is open to serious doubt. It refers here to a model that can be constructed from elements long visible in Europe and to a certain degree even in America. Social and economic developments in Europe since the end of the First World War are interpreted as transitional processes transforming private capitalism into state capitalism. The closest approach to the totalitarian form of state capitalism has been made in National Socialist Germany. Theoretically, the totalitarian form of state capitalism is not the only possible result of the present process of transformation. It is easier, however, to construct a model for it than for the democratic form of state capitalism, to which our experience gives us few clues. One of our basic assumptions is that 19th century free trade and free enterprise are on the way out. The restoration is doomed for similar reasons as was the attempt to restore feudalism in post-Napoleonic France. The totalitarian form of state capitalism is a deadly menace to all values of Western civilization. Those who want to maintain these values must fully understand the possibilities and limitations of the aggressor if their resistance is to meet with success. Furthermore, they must be able to show in what way the democratic values can be maintained under the changing conditions. If our assumption of the approaching end of the era of private capitalism is correct, the most gallant fight to restore it can only lead to a waste of energy and eventually serve as a trailblazer for totalitarianism. New section. The concept, quote, state capitalism. In the rapidly growing literature on the coming social order, the word, quote, state capitalism is eschewed by most authors and other words stand in its place. Quote, state-organized private property monopoly capitalism, end quote. Quote, managerial society, quote, administrative capitalism, quote, bureaucratic collectivism, quote, totalitarian state economy, quote, status capitalism, quote, neo-mercantilism, quote, economy of force, quote, state socialism, are a very incomplete set of labels used to identify the same phenomenon. The word state capitalism, parenthesis, so runs the argument, end parenthesis, is possibly misleading insofar as state capitalism could be understood to denote a society wherein the state is the sole owner of all capital, and this is not necessarily meant by those who use it. Nevertheless, the term state capitalism indicates four items better than do all the other suggested terms: that state capitalism is the successor of private capitalism, that the state assumes important functions of the private capitalist, that profit interests still play a significant role, and that it is not socialism. We defined, quote, state capitalism, end quote, in its two most typical varieties, its totalitarian and its democratic form, as a social order differing on the following points from, quote, private capitalism, from which it stems historically. 1. The market is deposed from its controlling function to coordinate production and distribution. The function has been taken over by a system of direct controls. Freedom of trade, enterprise, and labor are subject to governmental interference of such a degree that they are practically abolished. With the autonomous market, the so-called economic laws disappear. 2. These controls are vested in the state, which uses a combination of old and new devices, including a, quote, pseudo-market, for regulating and expanding production and coordinating production with consumption. Full employment of all resources is claimed as the main achievement in the economic field. The state transgresses all the limits drawn for peacetime state activities. 3. Under a totalitarian form of state capitalism, the state is the power instrument of a new ruling group, which has resulted from the merger of the most powerful vested interests, the top-ranking personnel in industry and business management, the higher strata of the state bureaucracy, including the military, and the leading figures of the victorious party's bureaucracy. Everybody who does not belong to this group is a mere object of domination. Under a democratic form of state capitalism, the state has the same controlling functions, but is itself controlled by the people. It is based on institutions which prevent the bureaucracy from transforming its administrative position into an instrument of power, and thus laying the basis for trans-shaping the democratic system into a totalitarian system. New section. The heritage of the market system. We start from the assumption that the hour of state capitalism approaches when the market economy becomes an utterly inadequate instrument for utilizing the available resources. The medium-sized private enterprise and free trade, the basis for the gigantic development of men's productive forces in the 19th century, are being gradually destroyed by the offspring of liberalism, private monopolies, and government interference. Concentration of economic activity in giant enterprises, with its consequences of rigid prices, self-financing, and ever-growing concentration, government control of the credit system and foreign trade, quasi-monopoly positions of trade unions with the ensuing rigidity of the labor market, large-scale unemployment of labor and capital, and enormous government expenses to care for the unemployed are as many symptoms of the decline of the market system. They became characteristic in various degrees for all industrialized countries after the First World War. Let's see, they have trying to get to the footnotes. Okay, footnote. The best statement on the, quote, breakdown of the market system, end quote, is still Appendix A to the Senate Document 13, 17th Congress First Session, on, quote, industrial prices and their relative inflexibility, unquote, by Gardner C. Means. See also the recent books on the decline of competition by Arthur Robert Burns, Edward H. Chamberlain, Joan Robinson. End footnote. The materials collected recently by various government agencies demonstrate how far a similar development has gone in the United States. The disturbances of the market mechanism caused by monopoly have been accentuated by a technical revolution in contemporary farming. A shattering dislocation of the world market since the First World War has blocked the channels of export which were instrumental in overcoming market difficulties during the 19th century. The danger involved in this situation has been recognized, and great efforts are being made to solve the problems of creating full employment while freeing the American market system from the forces which strangle it. Analogous developments may reach a point where no measure short of a reorganization of the economic system can prevent the complete disintegration of the social structure. Such a reorganization might take place by a long succession of stopgap measures, many of them contradicting each other, without a preconceived plan, and often very much against the original intentions of their authors. Theoretically, it is possible to construct an integrated model of the new organization, which might replace the outworn system, with a promise of achieving two goals: to guarantee full employment and to maintain the basic elements of the old social structure. If the market system is to be replaced by another organizational form, the new system must perform certain functions which are necessarily connected with the division of labor. In broadest terms, these, quote, necessary functions fall into three groups: coordination of needs and resources, direction of production and distribution, implying 1, a way of defining the needs of society in terms of consumer goods, reproduction of plant, machinery and raw materials, and expansion. Footnote. I'm not really sure if this is a 4 or a 5. Oh, it's a 5. And I missed the first footnote. Okay. Footnote 4. They can be defined as those without which even the bare subsistence of society cannot be reproduced. The description that follows, however, understands, quote, necessary functions as those achieving the best results under given historic conditions. This is what liberal theory claims for the market system. End footnote. Footnote. In this simple scheme, luxuries are included in consumer goods and defense materials under machinery. End footnote. Two, allocation of all available resources in such a manner that full employment and, quote, utmost satisfaction of the recognized needs are attained. 3. Coordination and control of all productive processes in order to obtain best performance. And 4. Distribution of the social product. The basic weaknesses of the market system in performing the, quote, necessary functions have been discussed again and again as its waste and inefficiency increasingly overbalanced the market system's earlier achievements. Criticism was voiced mainly against the shortcomings of the price mechanism in directing production, the contradictory performance of the profit motive, which obstructs the use of the available resources, the murderous mechanics of coordinating the disequilibrated economy. That is, the business cycles with the business cycle's cumulative processes of destruction. But while before the First World War the market mechanism was still workable, even if it was always far from performing in practice what it was supposed to be theoretically, the intrusion of monopolies with their rigid prices gradually caused the breakdown of the market system in an ever-growing sphere. New section. A new set of rules. State capitalism replaces the methods of the market system by a new set of rules based upon a combination of old and new means. 1. A general plan gives the direction for production, consumption, saving, and investment. The introduction of the principle of planning into the economic process means that a plan is to be constructed for achieving on a national scale certain chosen ends with all available resources. It does not necessarily imply that all details are planned in advance or that no freedom of choice at all is given to the consumer, but it contrasts sharply to the market system, inasmuch as the final word on what needs shall be satisfied and how is not left to the anonymous and unreliable pole of the market, carried through post festum, but to a conscious decision on ends and means, at least in a broad outline, and before production starts. The discussion on planning has come to a point where it seems as if the arguments raised against the technical workability of such a general plan can be refuted. Footnote. See for a discussion of the latest literature on the theory of planning. See for a discussion of the latest literature on the theory of planning, Edward Hyman's article, Literature on the Theory of a Socialist Economy, and Karl Landauer's Literature on Economic Planning, and H.D. Dickinson's Economics of Socialism. End footnote. The genuine problem of a planned economy does not lie in the economic but in the political sphere, in the principles to be applied in deciding what needs shall have preference, how much time shall be spent for work, how much of the social product shall be consumed, and how much used for expansion, etc. Obviously, such decisions cannot be completely arbitrary, but are to a wide degree dependent upon the available resources. 2. Prices are no longer allowed to behave as masters of the economic process, but are administered in all important sections of it. This follows from the principle of planning and means that in favor of a planned economy, the market is deprived of the market's main function. It does not mean that prices cannot exist any longer, but that if prices do exist, prices have thoroughly changed their character. Nothing may seem on the surface to have changed. Prices are quoted on goods and services paid for in money. The rise and fall of single prices may be quite common, but the relations between prices and costs of production on the one side and supply and demand on the other side, while strictly interconnected in their totality, become disconnected in those cases where they tend to interfere with the general plan. What remains of the market system behaves like its predecessor, but its function has changed from a general manager of the economic process into a closely controlled tool. Footnote. Oh shit, I didn't finish the last footnote. Let me finish the last footnote. We do not intimate that a general plan exists in Nazi Germany or has ever existed in Nazi Germany. In its place stands the goal of arming as speedily and efficiently as possible with full use of all resources. Some plan elements have come into being, while the plan principle, used first as a propaganda slogan in Germany, is rapidly spreading there. End footnote. Footnote. For an outstanding analysis of the new functions and the performance of the, quote, pseudo-market, see A. Lowe's article, Economic Analysis and Social Structure, published in the Manchester School, Volume 7, 1936. Lowe's arguments pertain to, quote, the pricing process under public ownership, end quote. Public control over the means of production, however, has the same economic consequences as state ownership. End footnote. In the last decades, administered prices have contributed much towards destroying the market automatism without creating new devices for taking over its, quote, necessary functions. They serve to secure monopoly profits at the expense of the non-monopolistic market price. Under state capitalism, they are used as a supplementary device for incorporating production and consumption into the general plan. 3. The profit interests of both individuals and groups, as well as all other special interests, are to be strictly subordinated to the general plan or whatever stands in its place. To understand the consequences of this principle leads far towards understanding totalitarian striking power. There are two conflicting interpretations of the role of profit interests in Nazi Germany. The one claims that the profit motive still plays the same role as before. The other states of the capitalists have been deprived of their social position and that profit in the old meaning does not exist any longer. We think that both tend to overlook the transformation of such a category as, quote, profit in modern society. Profit interests may still be very significant in the totalitarian forms of state capitalistic society. But even the most powerful profit interests gradually become subordinate to the general, quote, plan. No state capitalistic government can or will dispense with the profit motive for two reasons. First, elimination of the profit motive would destroy the character of the entire system. And second, in many respects, the profit motive remains as an efficient incentive. In every case, however, where the interest of single groups or individuals conflicts with the general plan, or whatever serves as its substitute, the individual interest must give way. This is the real meaning of the ideology Gemeinnutz, Get for Eigennutz. Let's see if I can get a translation of that. Public benefit comes before self-interest, is what that means. Back to the text. This is the real meaning of the ideology of Gemeinnützigkeit for Eigennutz. Again, translated as public benefit before self-interest. The interest of the ruling group as a whole is decisive, not the individual interest of those who form the group. Footnote. Obviously, the first to bear the brunt of subordinating the private to the, quote, common interest is the, quote, little man in all spheres of society, end footnote. The significance of this state capitalist principle can be fully grasped when it is contrasted with recent experiences in countries where private capitalism still prevails and where strong group interests prevent the execution of many urgent tasks necessary for the, quote, common good. This needs no bad will or exceptional greed to explain it. In a system based upon the self-interest of every person, this principle can sometimes be expected to come to the fore in a form that contradicts the optimism of its underlying philosophy. If ever the statement was true that, quote, private vices are public benefits, end quote, it could only have been under conditions where the typical economic unit was comparatively small and a free market functioned. State capitalist policy, which opposes liberalism, has understood that there are narrow limits beyond which the pursuit of private interests cannot be reconciled with efficient general planning, and it has drawn the consequences. Footnote. An example of the result is the amazing elasticity and efficiency in building up an enormous war machinery in National Socialist Germany. This, however, should not be interpreted to mean that in Germany private property interests do not endeavor to gain precedence. In motor car standardization, for instance, the private interests of the big concerns determined all the measures taken. Since a general plan of economic policy was never published in Germany, it is impossible to decide to what extent private interests did obtain preference. End footnote. 4. In all spheres of state activity, parenthesis, under state capitalism, that means in all spheres of social life as well, end parenthesis, guesswork and improvisation give place to the principles of scientific management. This rule is in conformity with state capitalism's basic conception of society as an integrated unit compared to one of the modern giants in steel, chemical, or motor car production. Large-scale production requires not only careful planning, but systematic elaboration of all single processes. Every waste or error in preparing materials and machinery and in drafting the elements of production is multiplied numerous times and may even endanger the productive process as a whole. The same holds true for society as soon as the previous differentiation between private costs, parenthesis, e.g. wages, end parenthesis, and social costs, parenthesis, e.g. unemployment, end parenthesis, is replaced by a measurement of the single process in terms of its ability to obtain what the planner considers the most desirable social product. But once this principle of, quote, rationalization has become mandatory for all public activities, this principle of, quote, rationalization will be applied in spheres which previously were the sanctuary of guesswork, routine, and muddling through: military preparedness, the conduct of war, behavior towards public opinion, application of the coercive power of the state, foreign trade and foreign policy, etc. Footnote. It appears that part of the Nazi successes may be better explained as the rational application of the best available methods in all fields. Parenthesis, from eliminating important vitamins in the diet of conquered nations to the practical monopoly in international propaganda, end parenthesis, than by any innate qualities of a military or organizational character. It is well to recall in this connection that German industry originally learned scientific management from America. End footnote. 5. Performance of the plan enforced by state power so that nothing essential is left to the functioning of the laws of the market or other economic, quote, laws. Footnote, e.g., new investments no longer flow automatically into those economic fields where the highest profits are made, but are directed by the planning board. In consequence, the mechanism known as equalization of the rate of profit no longer works. End footnote. This may be interpreted as a supplementary rule which states the principle of treating all economic problems as in the last analysis political problems. Creation of an economic sphere into which the state should not intrude, essential for the era of private capitalism, is radically repudiated. Replacement of the mechanics of laissez-faire by governmental command does not imply the end of private initiative and personal responsibility, which might even be put on a broader basis, but will be integrated within the framework of the general plan. During the non-monopolistic phase of private capitalism, the capitalist, whether an individual or a group of shareholders represented by its manager, had power over this property within the limits of the market laws. Under state capitalism, this power has been transferred to the government, which is still limited by certain, quote, natural, end quote, restrictions, but free from the tyranny of an uncontrolled market. The replacement of the economic means by political means, as the last guarantee for the reproduction of economic life, changes the character of the whole historic period. It signifies the transition from a permanently economic to an essentially political era. Footnote, Frank Monk, The Economics of Force, 1940. Lawrence Dennis, The Dynamics of War and Revolution, 1940. End footnote. Under private capitalism, all social relations are mediated by the market. Men meet each other as agents of the exchange process, as buyers and sellers. The source of one's income, the size of one's property, are decisive for one's social position. The profit motive keeps the economic mechanism of society moving. Under state capitalism, men meet each other as a commander or commanded. The extent to which one can command or has to obey depends in the first place upon one's position in the political setup, and only in a secondary way upon the extent of one's property. Labor is appropriated directly instead of by the, quote, roundabout way of the market. Another aspect of the changed situation under state capitalism is that the profit motive is superseded by the power motive. Obviously, the profit motive is a specific form of the power motive. Under private capitalism, greater profits signify greater power and less dependent on the commands of others. The difference, however, is not only that the profit motive is a mediated form of the power motive, but that the latter, the power motive, is essentially bound up with the power position of the ruling group, while the former pertains to the individual only. New section, Control of Production. A discussion of the means by which state capitalism could fulfill its program must hew closely. New section, Control of Production. A discussion of the means by which state capitalism could fulfill state capitalism's program must hew closely to the technical and organizational possibilities available today in all highly industrialized countries. We refer not to any future developments, but to the use which could be made here and now of the available resources. If, however, it can be shown that a state capitalist system can carry out more successfully than the market does the, quote, necessary functions required by the division of labor, it seems reasonable to expect that much greater resources could be made available within a short period. State capitalism must solve the following problems in the sphere of production if a rising social product is to result. Create full employment based upon coordination of all productive units, reproduce the existing resources of plant, raw materials, management, and labor on a level adequate to technical progress, and expand the existing plant. All these tasks must be embodied in the general plan. Given this plan, the execution hinges upon the solution of merely technical and administrative tasks instead of on the economic task of producing for an unknown and largely unforeseeable market. Production is for a clearly defined use, not, quote, commodity, end quote, production in the meaning of a market system. Footnote, see Rudolf Hilferding, State Capitalism or Totalitarian State Economy, which is or will be on the channel by the time this video goes up. It should be understood that, quote, production for use, end quote, is not intended to mean, quote, for the use of free men in a harmonious society, end quote, but simply the contrary of production for the market. End footnote. The experiences piled up by modern giant enterprises and associations of enterprises in carrying through enormous plans make total production control technically possible. Specific means of control include modern statistics and accounting methods, regular reporting of all changes in plant and supply, systematic training of workers for future requirements, rationalization of all technical and administrative processes, and all the other devices developed in the huge modern enterprises and cartels. In addition to these traditional methods, which have superseded the occult entrepreneurial art of guessing correctly what the future market demand will be, the state acquires the additional controlling power implied in complete command over money and credit. The banks are transformed into mere government agencies. Footnote. For an impressive discussion of this trend in Nazi Germany, see Dal Hitchcock, The German Financial Revolution, published in Harper's Monthly, 1941. End footnote. Every investment, whether that investment serves replacement or expansion, is subject to plan, and neither oversaving nor overexpansion, neither a, quote, investment strike nor Fehlinvestitionen can create large-scale disturbances. Bad investments is what that means. Let me repeat that sentence, translated that into English. Every investment, whether that investment serves replacement or expansion, is subject to plan, and neither oversaving nor overexpansion, neither a, quote, investment strike, nor, quote, Fehlinvestition, or bad investment, can create large-scale disturbances. Errors which are bound to occur can be traced with comparative ease owing to the central position of the planning board. While they may amount to sheer waste, their damaging effects may be minimized by charging them off to the economy as a whole instead of to a single enterprise. Besides the banks, many of the organizations developed by business interests, trade associations, cartels, chambers of commerce, etc., serve as or are transformed into government agencies for the control of production. The rigid control of capital, whether it in its monetary form or as plant, machinery, commodities, fundamentally transforms the quality of private property in the means of production and its owner, the, quote, capitalist. While a good many of the risks, not all the risks, borne by the owner under private capitalism might have been eliminated, only so much profit is left to him as the government sees fit to allow. Regulation of prices, limitation of distributed profits, compulsory investment of surplus profits in government bonds, or in ventures which the capitalist would not have chosen voluntarily. And finally, drastic taxation. All these measures converge to the same end, namely, to transform the capitalist into a mere rentier whose income is fixed by government decree as long as his investments are successful, but who has no claim to withdraw his capital if no, quote, interests are paid. The trend towards this situation described in our model has been widely discussed during recent years. An extreme statement is that of E.F.M. Durbin. I'll look this person up. This is E.F.M. Durbin, appears to be Evan Durbin. Evan Durbin lived from 1906 to 1948 and was a British economist and labor politician whose writings combined a belief in central economic planning with a conviction that the price mechanism of markets was indispensable. Historian David Kynaston describes Durbin as, quote, the Labour Party's most interesting thinker of the 1940s and arguably of the 20th century. End footnote. Back to the text. An extreme statement is that of E.F.M. Durbin, quote, property and industrial capital has wholly lost the social functions supposed to be grounded in property and industrial capital. It has ceased to be the reward for management, and it has largely ceased to serve as a reward for personal saving. Property and capital has become the functionless claim to a share in the product of industry. The institution is worse than indefensible. It is useless, end quote. Footnote. E.F.M. Durbin, The Politics of Democratic Socialism. The description for E.F.M. Durbin's The Politics of Democratic Socialism says, published in 1940, The Politics of Democratic Socialism covers a number of subjects, including social psychology, economic history, Marxist doctrine, and the academic subject of politics, to name a few, with Durbin's compulsion to explain and defend the views about social and economic policy that Durbin believes to be true, makes this an interesting, insightful, and educational book for those who want to learn about socialism and democracy. End footnote. Back to the text. End footnote. The same phenomenon is criticized in the following comment, quote, emphasis of management today is not upon venture, upon chance-taking as capitalism requires, but is upon price control, market division, avoidance of risk. This may be good short-range policy, but if business isn't willing to take chances, somebody soon is going to ask why it should enjoy profits, why the management cannot be hired by government, which is called on to do all the chance-taking and might want to direct industry. End quote. Footnote. Quoted in the report for the Business Executive, November 28, 1940, end footnote. This trend found its expression in the stockholders' loss of control. This trend toward losing social function as the private owner of capital has found the trend towards losing his social function as the private owner of capital's expression in the stockholders' loss of control over the management. The trend towards losing his social function as private owner of capital has culminated so far in the new German legislation on joint stock companies, in which the stockholders are deprived by law of any right to interfere with management. To sum up, under state capitalism, the status of the private capitalist is changed in a threefold way. 1. The entrepreneurial and the capitalist function, i.e., direction of production and discretion in the investment of one's capital, are separated from each other. Management becomes virtually independent of, quote, capital, without necessarily having an important share in corporate property. 2. The entrepreneurial and capitalist functions are interfered with or taken over by the government. 3. The capitalist, parenthesis, insofar as the capitalist is not accepted as entrepreneur on the merits of the capitalist managerial qualifications, in parenthesis, is reduced to a mere rentier. Here the question of incentive arises. In private capitalism, the decisive incentives for the capitalist to maintain, expand, and improve production are the profit interest and the permanent threat of economic collapse if the effort should slacken. The non-capitalists are driven to cooperate efficiently by hunger and their desire for a better life and security. Under state capitalism, both groups lose essential parts of their incentive. What new devices will take over their most, quote, necessary, end quote, functions? What will prevent stagnation and even regression in all spheres of state capitalistic society? In relation to the majority of the population, those who neither own nor command the means of production, the answer is simple. The whip of unemployment is replaced by political terror, and the promise of material and ideological rewards continues to incite the utmost personal effort. The profit motive still plays an important role for capitalists and the managerial bureaucracy, since large compensation is granted for efficient investment and management. Personal initiative is freed from obstructing property interest and systematically encouraged. Footnote. See the article by Karl Dreher, Why Hitler Wins, published in Harper's Monthly, October 1940. End footnote. Within the controlling group, however, the will to political power becomes the center of motivation. Every decision is at bottom oriented to the goal of maintaining and expanding the power of the group as a whole and of each of the group's members. New industrial empires are being built and old ones expanded with this goal in mind. But we also have here the source of the principle that individual interests must always be subordinated to the common group and interest. This principle, in turn, contributes decisively to strengthening governmental control, since only a strong government can integrate conflicting interests while serving the power interests of the whole group. New section, Control of Distribution. Quote, we have learned how to produce everything in practically unlimited quantities, but we don't know how to distribute the goods, end quote. This is the popular formulation to describe the riddle of private capitalism in private capitalism's latest phase. Given a general plan and the political power to enforce it, state capitalism finds ample technical means for distributing everything that can be produced with the available resources. The main difficulty of private capitalism is eliminated by the fact that under state capitalism, the success of production does not necessarily depend upon finding buyers for the product at profitable prices in an unstable market, but is consciously directed towards satisfying public and private wants, which are to a large extent defined in advance. Adjustments which must be made as a result of technical errors in the general plan or unexpected behavior in consumer demand need not lead to losses for the individual producer, and even less to economic disaster for him. Losses easily can be pulled by the administration. The means which are available for carrying over the, quote, necessary distributive function of a competitive market may be conveniently classified into direct allocation, priorities, quota, etc., and administered prices. The former applies above all to the distribution of goods to producers. The latter refers mainly to the sphere of consumption. There is, however, direct allocation applies above all to the distribution of goods to producers, and administered prices refers mainly to the sphere of consumption. There is, however, no sharp dividing line between the fields of application of the two. Means. Footnote. So far, the nearest approach to the state capitalist model of distribution has been made in Soviet Russia. See L.E. Hubbard, Soviet Trade and Distribution, published in London 1938. The trend in Germany shows the same direction. Let's see if this book says anything. Yeah, this doesn't look like a book that's going to have much of a description because it's a million years old. Just want to look it up. Labor is the outstanding end footnote. Labor is the outstanding example in which a combination of both methods is applied. In constructing a rough model of the distributive mechanism under state capitalism, we always have to keep in mind that production and producers' consumption are two aspects of the same process. Since under modern conditions, producers and consumers are, as a rule, not the same person, distribution serves as a means of integrating them. The production plan is based on a comparatively arbitrary decision as to how much of the social product is to be available for consumption and how much is to be used for expansion. All major problems of distribution under state capitalism have been discussed thoroughly in the literature on socialist planning published within the last decade. Footnote. See Note 6 above. The latest important publication is that of E.F.M. Durbin. Most of those who advocate the superiority of a deliberately, quote, manipulated market confined, quote, within the straitjacket of planned objectives, end quote, have given little attention to the fact that planning is far from being identical with socialism. That is why their work, important as it is, appears even more as a contribution to the theory of state capitalism. End footnote. While all writers in favor of a planned society agree that the tyranny of the market must be abolished, differences of opinion exist on the question of where to draw the limits for the use of a pseudo-market. Some writers recommend that the managers of the socialized industry should, quote, behave as if under competitive capitalism, end quote. They should, quote, play at competition, end quote. Footnote. See Lionel Robbins, Economic Planning and International Order. Let me look that book up. Lionel Robbins was the head of the London School of Economics for a long time. I think he was pretty important in making what you might call marginalism and neoclassical economics mainstream, or the mainstream in Anglo-American economic sciences. Anyway, hold on. I'm just talking and I'm distracting myself. Economic Planning and International Order. Yeah, not seeing any descriptions of that book either. End footnote. A model partly constructed on the results of this discussion may be used to illustrate how distribution works under state capitalism. The distribution of goods to producers starts from the following situation. 1. Most productive facilities are privately owned but controlled by the government. 2. Each industry is organized in cartels. 3. Prices react to changes in supply and demand as well as to changes in the cost structure within the limits permitted by the plan authority and the monopolies. 4. A general plan for the structure of the social product is in existence. Under these circumstances, a system of priorities and quotas will guarantee the execution of the plan in the plan's broad lines. These allocations cover reproduction of existing resources, expansion, including defense, and the total output of consumer goods, which every industry shall produce. Within each industry, a quota system will provide for the distribution according to a more detailed plan or according to expressions of consumer choice. Not much room is left in this setup for flexible prices. The partial survival of the profit motive will induce manufacturers who are offered higher prices for their products to bid up in turn the prices of their, quote, factors. But the, quote, office of price control, end quote, will not permit prices to go higher than is compatible with the general plan. Since all major units of production are under the control of cartels, the propensity to keep prices flexible should not be overestimated. Governmental control will be immensely facilitated by the enormous role of public works necessary to maintain full employment under all circumstances. Full employment in the strict sense of the word can be achieved in regard to labor only. Due to technological facts, it is not possible in the case of plant and equipment. New plant and new machinery constructed according to the latest technical development require a minimum size of plant, which as a rule leads to temporary overcapacity at the moment of their completion. If no ways for using this overcapacity can be found speedily, some idleness of capital will arise. This might happen with entire durable goods industries, e.g., machine tools, if the need for the durable goods industry's product is temporarily saturated. Neither this nor other, quote, maladjustments, end quote, can produce the cumulative effect so vicious under the free market system. For the capital owner might be compensated for his loss out of pooled profits or public sources, and provision for a constant reserve and planning of the labor supply will take care of the displaced workers. Footnote, see Gottfried von Haberler, Prosperity and Depression. The description of prosperity and depression, which is says, this book has its origin in a resolution adopted by the Assembly of the League of Nations in September 1930, by which it was decided that an attempt should be made to coordinate the analytical work then being done on the problem of the recurrence of periods of economic depression. This book is divided into two parts. The first part contains a systematic analysis of existing theories, the second an attempt to weave from those theories a general synthesis. Dr. G. von Haberler, born 1900, studied economics and law at the universities of Vienna and Bonn, obtained a Rockefeller Fellowship in 1928, and was later a professor at the University of Vienna, and at the time of original publication of this study by the League of Nations in 1937, was assistant professor at Harvard University. From 1934 to 1936, Gottfried von Haberler was a member of the Economic Intelligence Service of the League of Nations. End footnote. Back to the text. Neither this nor other, quote, maladjustments can produce the cumulative effects so vicious under the free market system, for a capital owner might be compensated for his loss out of pooled profits or public sources, and provision for a constant reserve in planning the labor supply will take care of the displaced workers. Technological unemployment will be handled in a similar way. It has been shown that the opposite case, periodical shortage of capital, can be avoided in a planned society. Footnote, see Karl Landauer, Planwirtschaft Wirtschaft, Verkehrswirtschaft, published in Munich, 1931. End footnote. Labor under state capitalism is allocated to the different sections of production like other resources. This does not prevent the planning authorities from differentiating wages. On the contrary, premiums in the form of higher real wages can be granted wherever extra efforts are demanded. The slave driver's whip is no workable means for extracting quality products from highly skilled workers who use expensive machinery. This differentiation in wage schedules, however, is not the outcome of market conditions, but of the wage administrator's decisions. No entrepreneur is allowed to pay higher wages than those fixed by this agency. With absolute control of wages, the government is in a position to handle the distribution of consumer goods with comparative ease. In cases of severe scarcity, as in wartime, direct allocation of consumers' goods might be the only adequate means for their distribution. In such a case, consumer choice is very limited but not entirely ruled out. Footnote. See, e.g., the quote point end quote system for the distribution of textiles in Germany and England. End footnote. If, however, a somewhat more adequate supply of consumer goods is available, the consumer may be as free, or with the greater purchasing power created by full employment, even more free in his choice under state capitalism than he is now. In order to achieve this goal with the means now at hand, a pseudo-market for consumer goods will be established. The starting point for that pseudo-market for consumer goods operation is a clearly defined relation between purchasing power which will be spent for consumption and the sum of prices of all available consumer goods. Both sums must be equal. In other words, the total income paid out to customers minus taxes, compulsory and voluntary savings must be the same as the price sum of all consumer goods which are for sale. If the quote net consumer income should be higher, a scramble for goods and a bidding up of prices would result. Under our definition, that quote net income excludes saving. If it should be lower, only part of the products could be distributed. The first step toward distributing the consumer goods is therefore to make the quote net income of all consumers in a given period equivalent to the sum of consumer goods output as decided by the general plan and the available inventory. This first step will prove insufficient for two reasons. 1. The consumer's voluntary savings may deviate from the plan. They may save either more or less than was expected in calculating the equilibrium. Both cases may be remedied by the use of the market laws of demand and supply, which will create inflationary or deflationary price movements to, quote, clear the market, end quote, if the price controlling agencies permit it. Two, the consumer's choices may deviate from the calculations of the planners. They may prefer some products and reject others. Here again, the old market mechanism may be allowed to come into play to enforce higher prices for goods in greater demand and to lower prices where and as long as an oversupply exists. A system of subsidies and surtaxes will eliminate serious losses, as well as surplus profits which could disturb the functioning of the plan. The distributive agency may completely, quote, overrule the consumer's choice for all practical purposes by fixing prices either extremely high or disproportionately low. So far, the price mechanism obeys the same laws as in the free market system. The difference becomes manifest in the effects which changing prices exercise on production. The price signals influence production only insofar as is compatible with the general plan and the established public policy on consumption. Price movements serve as a most valuable instrument for announcing differences between consumers' preferences and the production plan. They cannot, however, compel the planning authority to follow these manifestations of consumers' will in the same way they compel every non-monopolistic producer in a free market. Footnote. For this whole set of problems, see Oscar Lange on the Economic Theory of Socialism, edited by E. Lippincott, published in Minneapolis, 1938. Let's look this up. Oscar Lange. Oscar Lange on the Economic Theory of Socialism. The little description here on Google Books says, "It is the belief of many capitalist laymen and economists that a socialist economy is impracticable. In this book, the arguments that socialism would not provide adequate incentives to spur men to effort, enterprise, and invention are brilliantly analyzed and finally dismissed as folklore. At the same time, the authors deny the impracticability of a socialist economy. They also present some of its serious problems." Back to the text and footnote. Under private capitalism, the monopolist, in resisting the market signals, disrupts the whole market system at the expense of all non-monopolistic market parties. Under state capitalism, the disconnection between price and production can do no harm, because the function of coordinating production and consumption has been transferred from market to the plan authority. Much attention has been given to the question of how consumers' choice can be calculated in advance. No, quote, godlike, end quote, qualities are required for the planning board. It has been shown that freedom of consumers' choice actually exists only to a very limited degree. Footnote, see the studies of the National Resources Planning Board on consumer incomes and patterns of resources use, reviewed in Studies in Philosophy and Social Science, 1940. End footnote. In studying large numbers of consumers, it becomes evident that size of income, tradition, and propaganda are considerably leveling down all individual preference schedules. The experience of large manufacturing and distributing concerns, as well as of cartels, contribute a most valuable supplement to the special literature on planning. New section: Economic limitations of state capitalism. In raising the question of economic limitations, we point to those which may restrict the arbitrariness of the decisions in state capitalism as contrasted with other social structures in which they may not appear. We are not concerned with limitations that apply to every social setup, e.g. those which result from the necessity to reproduce the given resources and to maintain full employment and optimum efficiency. The first and most frequent objection against the economic workability of a state capitalistic system is that it is good only in a scarcity economy, especially for periods of war preparedness and war. For a scarcity economy, so runs the argument, most of the economic difficulties against which private capitalism struggles do not exist. Overproduction and overinvestment need not be feared, and all products, however inefficiently produced, and however bad their quality, find a ready demand. As soon as the temporary emergency is past, however, and a greater supply becomes available in all fields, state capitalism will prove utterly inadequate for securing the best use of available resources, for avoiding bottlenecks in one product and overproduction in others, and for providing the consumers with what they demand at the lowest possible cost. Even if all means of production are under governmental control, efficient planning is possible only under conditions of emergency. The argument advanced for this view can be boiled down to the following. In a planned economy, costs cannot be accounted for. The free choice of the consumer must be disregarded. The motives for efficient production and distribution disappear. And as a result, a planned economy must, under modern conditions, be much less productive than a market economy. Footnote. The best survey of the history and details of the argument is Collectivist Economic Planning, edited by F.A. Hayek. The description of this book says, come on. In 1920, Ludwig von Mises dropped a bombshell on the European economic world with Ludwig von Mises's article titled Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth. It argued that socialism was impossible as an economic system. It set off 2 decades of debate. So by the time the essays appeared in English in this very book here, in 1935, the debate was still raging. This volume, edited by F.A. Hayek, dug the knife into socialism's heart, unlike any book to ever appear. It contains essays by Mises, along with a foreword and afterword by Hayek. It also contains more commentary by N.G. Pearson, George Halm, and Enrico Barone. It is exceptionally well edited and beautifully argued, and has not been in print for many years. The contents are nothing short of prophetic. The so-called calculation argument has never been answered. It shows that without private property and capital goods, there can be no prices and hence no data available for cost accounting. Production becomes random at best and completely irrational. Mises had convinced his generation, and this book completely devastates the whole socialist apparatus from a theoretical point of view. No one interested in this debate can afford not to be well versed in the contents of this book. Back to the text and footnote. We think that anyone who seriously studies this modern literature on planning must come to the conclusion that, whatever his objections to the social consequences of planning, these arguments against its economic efficiency no longer hold. All technical means for efficient planning, including the expansion of production in accordance with consumer wants and the most advanced technical possibilities, and taking into account the cost in public health, personal risks, unemployment, never adequately calculated in the cost sheet of private enterprise, all these technical means are available today. Another counter-argument holds that as soon as state capitalism turns from concentrating upon armaments to a genuine peace economy, state capitalism's only alternative, if state capitalism wants to avoid unemployment, is to spend a very substantial part of the national income for the construction of modern, quote, pyramids, or to raise considerably the standard of living. No economic causes exist which could prevent a state capitalistic government from doing so. The obstacles are of a political nature and will be dealt with later. A third argument points in the opposite direction. This argument objects that state capitalism necessarily leads to a standstill in technics or even a regress. Investments which slow down and technical progress cease if the market laws are put out of operation. As long as competitive armament continues, the contrary will probably be true. Besides the profit motive, the vital interest of the controlling group will stimulate both investment and technical progress. In order to maintain and extend its power, the controlling group will come into conflict with foreign interest, and its success will depend upon its military force. This, however, will be a function of the technical efficiency. Any slackening in the speed of technical progress must lead to military inferiority and to destruction. Footnote. The German experience shows that probably never in the history of industrialism were new inventions put into application so quickly or such an enormous percentage of the national income used for investments. End footnote. Only after all possible enemies will have disappeared because the whole world will be controlled by one totalitarian state will the problem of technological progress and capital expansion come to the fore. Are there, one may ask, no economic limitations at all to the existence and expansion of state capitalism? With its rise, will a utopia emerge in which all economic wants can easily be fulfilled if political factors don't interfere? Did not the liberal theory also believe it had proved that the market system will guarantee the market system's constituents the full use of all resources if not interfered with? And did it not become apparent later that inherent forces prevented the market system from functioning and ushered in growing interference by private monopolies and the government? Forewarned as we are unable to discover any inherent economic forces, quote, economic laws, of the old or new type, which could prevent the functioning of state capitalism. Footnote. This also applies to the falling tendency of the rate of profit which, according to Marxian theory, plays havoc with private capitalism. If expansion of capital is subject to a general plan, which is itself approved by the controlling group, the percentage of surplus value in ratio to invested capital could fall close to zero without creating any disturbances. This fall, however, is most effectively counteracted by the enforced maintenance of full employment. We shall not enter upon the discussion of whether state capitalism itself emerges under the pressure of the falling rate of profit, nor how far it makes sense to speak in terms of, quote, value beyond the limits of a market economy. End footnote. Government control of production and distribution furnishes the means for eliminating the economic causes of depressions, cumulative destructive processes, and unemployment of capital and labor. We may even say that under state capitalism, economics as a social science has lost its object. Economic problems in the old sense no longer exist when the coordination of all economic activities is affected by a conscious plan instead of by the natural laws of the market. Where the economist formerly racked his brain to solve the puzzle of the exchange process, the economist meets under state capitalism with problems of administration. There are indeed limitations to state capitalism, but they derive from natural conditions as well as from the very structure of the society which state capitalism seeks to perpetuate. New section. Natural and other non-economic limitations. Footnote. Most of the arguments that follow refer to the totalitarian form of state capitalism only. End footnote. 1. To be fully workable, state capitalism needs an adequate supply of raw material, plant and labor of all kinds, technicians, administrators, skilled and unskilled labor, characteristic for a highly industrialized country. Without a plentiful supply of raw material and the outfit and machinery and scale of a modern industrial society, great weight must accompany state capitalistic intervention, possibly greater than under a market economy. For the first limitation, inadequate supply of raw materials. A typical example is offered by Nazi Germany. The enormous machinery which had to be built to compensate for the insufficiency of the raw material basis, too small to cope with the armament program, and the difficulties for the producer to obtain raw materials, and in consequence, new machinery, cannot be attributed to the system itself, but to the fact that one of its main prerequisites was lacking from the very beginning. Footnote. See Günther Reimann, The Vampire Economy. The description for A Vampire Economy, Doing Business Under Fascism, published in, I don't know when, it says 2007 here, when it was originally published, 1939. Here is a study of the actual workings of business under National Socialism, written in 1939. Reimann discusses the effects of heavy regulation, inflation, price controls, trade interference, national economic planning, and attacks on private property, and what consequences they had for human rights and economic development. This is a subject rarely discussed, and for reasons that are discomforting. As much as the left hated the social and cultural agenda of the Nazis, the economic agenda fit straight into a pattern of statism that emerged in Europe and the United States. In this area, the world has not been denazified. The book makes for alarming reading as one discovers the extent to which the Nazi economic agenda of totalitarian control, without finally abolishing private property, has become the norm. The author is by no means an Austrian, but his study provides historical understanding and a frightening look at the consequences of state economic management. Back to the text and footnote. On the other hand, many of the Soviet Russian economic failures may be traced back to the lack of both raw materials and adequate development of the productive forces, lack of trained technicians, skilled workers, and of the qualities known as work discipline, all of which are plentiful in highly industrialized countries only, go a long way in explaining the slow progress of rearming, reorganizing the transportation system, and raising or even maintaining the standard of living in Soviet Russia. But even here, a government-controlled economic system has shown the power to survive under conditions where a system of free enterprise would have collapsed immediately. Government-controlled foreign trade and the development of industry for, quote, ersatz materials may overcome the limitations of a too narrow basis of raw materials, filling the gap between a fully industrialized and chiefly agricultural economy is a much more painful and drawn out process. 2. Differences in vital interests will crop up in the group or groups controlling the state. They can stem from different positions within the administration, different programs for maintaining or expanding power, or the struggle for the monopoly of control. Unless adequate provisions are made for overcoming these differences, bad compromises and continuous struggle will arise. 3. Conflicting interests within the ruling class might thwart the construction of a general plan embodying the optimum of all available resources for achieving consistent chosen ends. The choice of the ends itself represents a major problem as long as no common will has been established. In our plain discussion, we always started from the assumption, quote, given a general plan, end quote. This means a plan for certain ends which must be chosen from among a variety of possible ones. Once the minimum requirements for consumption, replacement, and expansion are fulfilled, the planners have a great deal of leeway. If their decisions do not converge into a consistent program, no general plan for the optimum use and development of the given productive forces can be drafted. 4. Conflicting interests, however, do not operate in the ruling group only. Since totalitarian state capitalism is the expression of an antagonistic society at its worst, the will to dominate from above and the counter-pressure from below cut deeply into the pseudo-liberty of the state capitalist planners. The planning board, while vested with all the technical means for directing the whole economic process, is itself an arena of struggle among social forces far beyond the planning board's control. It will be seen that planning in an antagonistic society is only in a technical sense the same tool as that used by a society in which harmony of interest has been established. Political considerations interfere at every step with the construction and execution of an optimum plan. The following paragraphs will offer some examples. How will expansion of production and technical progress be motivated after fear of aggression or objects for new conquest have vanished? Will not under such conditions the dreaded technological standstill make its appearance, thus spoiling all chances of reducing the drudgery of labor while raising the standard of living? Footnote. See Julian Gumpert's The Expansion and Production of the Totalitarian System. There, Gumpertz makes the point that after property, quote, becomes a semi-sovereign function of rights, privileges, prerogatives, transactions, that is, the more and more dissociated from the active and actual carrying forward of production, this latter function creates a new class and is appropriated by it, end quote. This class, quote, represents a depository of skills, abilities, knowledges, traditions that moves the organization of economic society from one point to another and organizes the new level of production accomplished. Overproduction from which economic society has been suffering is centered to a large extent in the overproduction of this progressive class, and is therefore not accidental, but essential that a totalitarian economy stop at its source the production and reproduction of these skills, end quote. Julian Gumpertz. Where am I? Gumpertz. What's the title? The Expansion of Production in the Totalitarian System. The Expansion of Production and the Totalitarian System. Not seeing anything for that. Back to the text and footnote. Where am I? A case could be made out for the view that a new set of motivations will arise under totalitarian state capitalism, which will combine the drive for power over men with the will to power over nature and counteract the development toward a static economy. But this is such a distant perspective that we may leave the question open, the more so since under totalitarian capitalism there are serious reasons to keep the productive forces static. Under a state capitalistic setup, will the general standard of living rise beyond narrow limits if the expansion program permits? The question can be answered in the affirmative for the democratic form of state capitalism only. For its authoritarian counterpart, however, the problem is different. The ruling minority in a totalitarian state maintains that minority's power, not only by terror and by atomization, but by that minority's control over the means of production and by keeping the dominated majority in complete spiritual dependence. The masses have no chance of questioning the durability and justification of the existing order. The virtues of war are developed, and all, quote, effeminacy, all longing for individual happiness, is rooted out. A rise in the standard of living might dangerously counteract such a policy. It would imply more leisure time, more professional skill, more opportunity for critical thinking, out of which a revolutionary spirit might develop. It is a widely spread error that the most dangerous revolutions are instigated by the most miserable strata of society. The revolutionary craving for liberty and justice found its most fertile breeding ground not among the paupers, but among individuals and groups who were themselves in a relatively better position. The ruling group in totalitarian state capitalism might therefore decide that from the point of view of its own security, a low general standard of living and long drudging working hours are desirable. An armament race and the excitement over threat of foreign, quote, aggression seem to be appropriate means for keeping the standard of living low and the war virtues high while maintaining full employment and promoting technical progress. Such a constellation, however, would furnish a striking example for a political limitation of productivity. The highly speculative question might be permitted: what would happen if totalitarian state capitalism were embodied in a unified world state in which the threat of aggression had disappeared for good? Even public works of undreamed scope could not prevent the general standard of living from rising under conditions of full employment. In such a case, the most clever devices of ideological mass domination and the grimmest terror are unlikely to uphold for a long period a minority dictatorship which can no longer claim itself to be necessary to maintain production and to protect the people from foreign aggression. If our assumption is correct that totalitarian state capitalism will not tolerate a high standard of living for the masses and cannot survive mass unemployment, the consequences seem to be that it cannot endure in a peace economy. As long as one national state capitalism has not conquered the whole earth, however, there will always be ample opportunities to spend most of the productive excess capacity, parenthesis, excess over the requirements for a minimum standard of living, end parenthesis, for ever increasing and technically more perfect armaments. Why can the policy of aggression not come to a standstill before one state has conquered the entire world? Even after a totalitarian state has acquired full autarky within its own territory, quote, preparedness, end quote, and foreign wars must go on at a rapid pace in order to protect against aggression from outside and revolution from within. A democratic state capitalism, while safe from within, is menaced by totalitarian aggression and must arm to the teeth and be ready to fight until all totalitarian states have been transformed into democracies. In the last century, it became evident that a society based on slave labor could not exist side by side with one organized on the principle of free labor. The same holds true in our day for democratic and totalitarian societies. New section: Control of the state under state capitalism. If state capitalism is a workable system, superior in terms of productivity to private capitalism, under conditions of monopolistic market disruption, what are the political implications? If the state becomes the omnipotent comptroller of all human activities, the question, quote, who controls the comptroller, end quote, embraces the problem of whether state capitalism opens a new way to freedom or leads to the complete loss of it as far as the overwhelming majority is concerned. Between the two extreme forms of state capitalism, the totalitarian and the democratic, numerous others are thinkable. Everything depends upon which social group in the last analysis direct the decisions of a government whose power has in all matters, quote, economic, as well as, quote, non-economic, never been surpassed in modern history. The following is intended as a rough sketch of the social structure under totalitarian state capitalism. 1. The government is controlled by and composed of a new ruling class. We have defined this new class as an amalgamation of the key bureaucrats in business, state, and party allied with the remaining vested interests. Footnote. This holds true for Germany and Italy, where semi-feudal landowners and big business are still in existence and form part of the ruling clique. The situation is different in Soviet Russia, where the old vested interests have been wiped out. Since in Russia, property and the means of production has changed hands completely from private owners to the state and no longer exists even in its modified and reduced form discussed above, it is somewhat doubtful whether our model of state capitalism fits the Soviet Union in its present state phase. End footnote. We have already mentioned that inherited or acquired wealth may still play a role in opening a way to this ruling group, but that it is not essential for participating in the group. One's position in the economic and administrative setup together with party affiliations and personal qualification, is decisive for one's political power. The new ruling class, by its grip on the state, controls everything it wants to. The general economic plan, foreign policy, rights and duties, life and death of the individual. Its decisions are not restrained by any constitutional guarantees, but by a set of rules only, designed for maintaining and expanding its own power. We have seen what control over the general economic plan involves. All the basic decisions on how to distribute the, quote, factors of production, end quote, among producers and consumer goods, on the working day, labor conditions, on wages and prices. To sum up, control of the general economic plan means control over the standard of living. Antagonisms of interest among the groups within the ruling class might lead to serious difficulties. The class interest of maintaining the new status, however, will probably be strong enough for a long time to overcome these antagonisms before they can turn into a menace to the system. The persons who form the ruling class have been prepared for their task by their position in, or their cooperation with, the monopolistic institutions of private capitalism. There, a rapidly growing number of decisive functions had become invested in a comparatively small group of bureaucrats. The leader and follower principle flourished long before it was promulgated as the basic principle of society, since more and more responsibility had been centralized in the top offices of government, business, trade unions, and political parties. 2. Those owners of capital who are, quote, capitalists without being managers and who could exercise great political influence during the whole era of private capitalism no longer have any necessary social functions. They receive interest on their investments for as long a time and in the measure that the new ruling class may be willing to grant. From the point of view of their social utility, they constitute a surplus population. Under the impact of heavy inheritance taxes, controlled stock markets, and generally hostile attitudes of the new ruling class against the, quote, Raffender capital, end quote. I don't know what that word means. Let's look it up. German to English. Raffender. It says gathering capital. I don't know what that means. These, quote, capitalists will probably disappear. The widespread hatred against them could develop only because the economic laws of capitalism had transformed their social role into that of parasites. 3. A semi-independent group, not belonging to the ruling class but enjoying more privileges than the Gefolgschaften, are the free professions and the middle and small business under governmental control. Both will disappear wherever a fully developed state capitalism corresponds to our model is reached. The process of concentration, which gains unprecedented momentum under state capitalism, absorbs the independent small and medium enterprise. The trend towards socialization of medicine, of journalism, and other free professions transforms their members into government employees. 4. The great majority of the people fall into the category of salaried employees of all types. They are subject to the leader principle of command and obedience. All their political rights have been destroyed, and carefully planned atomization has simplified the task of keeping them under strict control. Labor's right to bargain collectively, to strike, to change jobs and residence at will, parenthesis, if its market position permits, end parenthesis, is abolished. Work becomes compulsory. Wages are fixed by government agencies. The leisure time of the worker and his family is organized from above. In some respects, this is antithetical to the position of labor under private capitalism and revives many traits of feudal conditions. 5. The new state openly appears as an institution in which all earthly power is embodied and which serves the new ruling class as a tool for its power politics. Seemingly independent institutions like party, army, and business form its specialized arms. A complicated relation exists, however, between the means and those who apply them, resulting in some genuine independence for these institutions. Political domination is achieved by organized terror and overwhelming propaganda on the one side, on the other by full employment and an adequate standard of living for all key groups. The promise of security and a more abundant life for every subject who submits voluntarily and completely. This system is far from being based upon rude force alone, in that it provides many, quote, real satisfactions for its subjects. It exists partly with the consent of the governed, but this consent cannot change the antagonistic character of a state capitalistic society in which the power interests of the ruling class prevent the people from fully using the productive forces for their own welfare and from having control over the organization and activities of society. We have referred here and there to what we think are particular traits of the democratic form of state capitalism. Since no approaches to it have so far been made in practice, and since the discussion of it is still in a formative stage, no attempt will be made here to construct a model for it. Footnote. See Charles A. Beard, Public Policy and the General Welfare, which marks an important step in this discussion. End footnote. No attempt will be made here. End footnote. The trend towards state capitalism is growing, however, in the non-totalitarian states. An increasing number of observers admit, very often reluctantly, that private capitalism is no longer able to handle the new tasks. Quote, all plans for internal post-war reconstruction start with the assumption that more or less permanent government controls will have replaced laissez-faire methods both in the nation and the international sphere. Thus, the choice is not between totalitarian controls and return to, quote, free enterprise. The choice is between totalitarian controls and controls voluntarily accepted by the people of each country for the benefit of society as a whole. End quote. Footnote. Vera Michel's Dean, Toward a New World Order, published in Foreign Policy Reports. Vera Michel's Dean lived from 1903 to 1972 and was a Russian-American political scientist. Vera Michel's Dean was the head of research for the Foreign Policy Association, one of the leading think tanks of the 1940s and 1950s, where Vera Michel's became one of the leading authorities in international affairs during the period. And before I was looking for Charles A. Beard's Public Policy and the General Welfare, but I don't think the internet was being slow, but I don't think there's anything to find anyway, so all right. Here we go. Back to the text and footnote. It is the lesson of all large-scale measures of government interference that they will contribute to the disruption of the market mechanism if they are not coordinated into a general plan. If government is to provide for all the items recognized as mandatory in the more serious post-war reconstruction programs, it must be vested with adequate powers, and these might not stop short of state capitalism. It is of vital importance for everybody who believes in the values of democracy that an investigation be made as to whether state capitalism can be brought under democratic control. The social as well as the moral problem with which the democracies are confronted has been formulated as follows, quote, ... How can we get effective use of our resources, yet at the same time preserve the underlying values in our tradition of liberty and democracy? How can we employ our unemployed? How can we use our plant and equipment to the full? How can we take advantage of the best modern technology, yet in all this make the individual source of value and individual fulfillment in society the basic objective? How can we obtain effective organization of resources, yet at the same time retain the maximum freedom of individual action? End quote. Footnote. That last quote was from the National Resources Committee, The Structure of the American Economy, Washington, D.C., 1939. There's a footnote before that I missed. That was by Vera Michels-Dean that says, footnote. A British fact-finding group composed of progressive economists, businessmen, civil servants, and professors, known as Political and Economic Planning, including the following items in its preliminary program prepared in 1940: maintenance after the war of full economic activity based on complete use of manpower and resources, quote, regardless of obsolete financial criteria, end quote, assurance of a minimum standard of life based on scientific standards of nutrition and proper provision for dependents, assurance of a minimum standard of housing based on a socially planned program of housing and social amenities, provision of medical care and a reasonable measure of economic security, covering the hazards of employment, accidents, ill health, widowhood, and old age, the provision of equal opportunities for education in every country, and the reestablishment of a European system of higher learning and research open to students of proved ability from all parts of the world, the provision of cultural and creative activities, and the establishment of organizations for the training and leisure of youth on a European scale, end quote. Vera Michels-Dean. End footnote. Totalitarian state capitalism offers the solution of economic problems at the price of totalitarian oppression. What measures are necessary to guarantee control of the state by the majority of the state's people instead of by a small minority? What ways and means can be devised to prevent the abuse of enormous power vested in state, industrial, and party bureaucracy under state capitalism? How can the loss of economic liberty be rendered compatible with the maintenance of political liberty? How can the disintegrative motive forces of today be replaced by integrative forces? How will the roots from which insurmountable social antagonisms develop be eliminated so that there will not arise a political alliance between dissentient partial interests and the bureaucracy aiming to dominate the majority? Can democratic state capitalism be more than a transitory phase, leading either to total oppression or to doing away with the remnants of the capitalistic system? The main obstacles to the democratic form of state capitalism are of a political nature and can be overcome by political means only. If our thesis proves to be correct, society on its present level can overcome the handicaps of the market system by economic planning. Some of the best brains of the country are studying the problem of how such planning can be done in a democratic way, but a great amount of theoretical work will have to be performed before answers to every question will be forthcoming. Okay, so that's the end of Friedrich Pollock's State Capitalism, Its Possibilities and Limitations. What year is this from again? 1941. Thank you so much for listening.